So there's something else that is further complicating the finances of the DDA, and that is what I'm calling the big dig, not meaning Boston, but meaning here. And the DDA is charged with servicing the $50 million bond debt.
That is correct.
And had to make apparently a large initial cash payment, which also reduced its balance, reduced the DDA's balance.
Right.
And Councilman Sabre-Briere questioned the CFO, Tom Crawford, and this was about a year ago, on the DDA's ability to pay for the dig without increasing parking fees. And Mr. Crawford stated unequivocally that the DDA could not make the payments without parking rate increases. So now, when the parking demand management was suggested by the city, at the time you had concerns, and from reading accounts in the Chronicle and stuff, a year ago, February, you were talking about the need to be clear and to honestly, I believe you said, communicate with the public about what was really happening. Do you want to tell us about that?
Well, the financing for the deck is highly complicated, and I'm not sure I understand exactly the whole situation. Right. But there is a bond for the deck that the city is involved with, and there is a fee that the city charges the DDA to do that bond issuance for them.
Yes.
It's, as you said, I think it's about $2 million. So that's on top of the cost of constructing the parking deck. There is this fee that just goes from the DDA into the city's general fund.
Yes.
They charge that fee, they say, on all their other departments as well. Whenever there's a capital project, there's an assessment that goes to the general fund. The financing for the deck also was partly paid for out of DDA fund balances. Mm-hmm. So the DDA has been in a very nice situation over the last several years in that the revenue from the parking has been accruing into our parking fund, so that there was and the TIF money. We hadn't been spending as much as we had been bringing in. We're a development authority, and managing the parking, that was mindful of that. You know, if you want to do a big project or you need to do something big, you have to have the resources there. Right. So I don't find it was a fault of the management at all that we had a balance available.
Right.
That balance is being spent down to pay for the new deck. It's also being funded by an increase in parking rates, and I feel that if the community is behind the DDA and the city want to build the deck, that if it needs to come from parking revenues, that's fine with me. I never was opposed to raising rates to pay for parking. What I was opposed to was a delay in the rate increase that was put in front of the DDA. So when we first suggested that we raise rates to fund the deck, there was some opposition from the business associations who were fearful that with the economy and the
Right.
increased rates that it would hurt their business. And the DDA actually delayed the rate increase by, I forget.
It was a couple of months.
It was about 3 months, I think, or 6 months, and then they phased it out. And I was opposed to that delay because I felt like the funding package for the deck was already so complicated and so tight into where the money was coming from. In part, some of the financing was coming from borrowing from our TIF fund to pay for the parking. That I didn't think it was very fair to be in the situation of possibly needing to raise rates later on after the deck was already built. My opinion was, if we're going to build a big deck, and you need a rate increase to do that, you should do them simultaneous, because the community wouldn't stand for a rate increase if we did it 3 years from now saying, or 4 years from now, or 5 years from now saying, well, we don't have any money left to pay for GO passes, or we'd like to fund the east-west rail coming from Detroit, but we don't have money to do that because we've built this big deck, so now we need to raise parking rates to do these other projects. And that didn't sit well with me, because I thought nobody's going to go for that then. If this community saying they need more parking, then we ought to raise rates at the same time.
So you felt it was more honest to do it up front and
Yes.
say, we need this so that we don't run out of, because my understanding is that actually your fund balance is really going to be dropping very low over the next 3 years
Yes.
with all these payments that you have to make. So now the city has requested what they call a comprehensive public parking management plan. And apparently it's going to be presented April 19th to City Council. Do you know something about this? Have you heard about it?
I know only a little bit. I've seen it at committees, and I've at the committee meetings, and I've seen drafts of it at our board meetings. My understanding is that the city, in an effort to possibly raise some revenue someplace, has looked to raise the to increase the number of hours of parking meter enforcement.
Right.
So instead of the meters going until 6 o'clock, they would go until 8 or 9. Now, this is part of. I mean, this is very. For me, it's theoretical, and then it gets frustrating because then it becomes about revenue when it shouldn't be. You mentioned parking demand management.
Yes.
That's something that the DDA has been attempting to do for a couple of years. We had a study that was done about, this is different from this current parking study. This was
Right.
one we had consultants hired to tell us more about our parking system and
Yes.
demand and how we should manage it. And one of the recommendations that they had was that we should be doing parking based on demand. So setting your rates and making changes to your system that would basically manage the supply and demand of parking. And I think that a lot of the recommendations and a lot of the things that the DDA has been doing in that regard are very good things. And so very simply, a simple example would be if you have a structure that is a very popular structure at the noon hour. It fills up really fast because people want to go there to park for lunch.
Right.
You raise the rate slightly there so that you might push people who don't want to pay the higher rate to a different area of town to park, and that those who are willing to stomach the higher rate because
Right.
they want to be able to park there will do that. Okay. And so then you're managing the supply of parking through rates. That's a simple example. Raising the hours of enforcement at meters is another example.
Do you agree with that?
I do. I think that meters are they're prime parking for the downtown, and people prefer to park there. That's what our study told us a couple of years ago. People prefer to park on the street nearest to where they want to shop. The only way that you can do that effectively is by charging a price for that parking. If you don't charge a price, somebody will park their car there and leave it there for as long as possible.
Right.
That also would include somebody who's working in that business, and I don't think that metered street parking is meant for people who work in those shops or those
Right.
restaurants. I mean, they are going to be there all day. They could park someplace a little bit further away and walk in. So what you want to have is that high demand, highly accessible parking available for patrons, and it needs to turn over. And the only way you can do that is by charging for it.
Okay.
The city kind of complicated things by wanting to do that ahead of time when we were kind of ready to roll that out and do it in a thoughtful way. And they said, we should just enforce the meters till 9 o'clock. And then it became a big, the businesses didn't want it.
Right.
People had this outcry because they made it about revenue and not about why it would benefit the downtown and why it would benefit people who presumably were opposed to